up your recompete programs, and the recompete community of practice is open to any and all folks who are involved in recompete programs, your component project partners, your coalition partners, folks who are implementing leads of component projects, or elsewise down the line. So please feel free to forward anything that we share out in terms of our events with anyone you think that would benefit from joining. The goal of the community of practice is to connect y'all to each other so you can see how folks across the country are doing this type of very important work, as well as to provide some technical assistance and peer-to-peer networking and also in-person event gatherings. And you'll be hearing a little bit more about that over the next coming months. One thing I want to highlight is an upcoming event on peer-to-peer roundtables on workforce development. And so I'm going to put a link to the chat so folks can click on that and forward it to anyone in your coalition that you think would benefit. We have a series of roundtables on workforce development that is coming up and going to be facilitated by our colleague Olivia Rice, who's been working in that space and at RTI for more than 20 years. But the conversation is going to be about apprenticeships, partnering with employers, workforce needs assessments, and wraparound services, and more, and learning from your peers. And so there's quite a few things that we have up and coming, and a few things that we've just gotten up off the ground that I wanted to highlight for folks. One thing is our LinkedIn. So I'm just going to put a link to that in the chat too, in case y'all haven't seen it. And we also have launched our SharePoint, which is a kind of like private hub for community of practice members to share information amongst each other. And then the last thing I'm going to put up is our website where you can find resources related to the types of workforce development and economic development work that y'all are doing across the country. And so I spoke more than I meant to. I'm going to pass it over to Avery to kick us off with this work.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. So in a lot of our initial meetings, many of you spoke and emphasized the need for data that is a top priority, and engaging employers is very central to your work. This webinar builds on that by providing feedback on how to explore regional employer surveys and how they can be used to collect meaningful workforce data. During this webinar, you will learn the purpose behind conducting these surveys, trade-offs involved, and the processes that are commonly used to collect this data. The session will also share real-world examples, best practices, and lessons learned to help guide effective employer engagement and data collection efforts. For example, surveys might show that employers are struggling to hire for roles that require specific certifications, flexible schedules, or prior experience. The data might also reveal real barriers preventing prime age individuals from entering or re-entering the workforce, such as skills gaps, childcare challenges, or transportation issues. Additionally, we heard that many of you are interested in surveying community members, and so we're preparing a webinar on that, and we'll have more information shortly. For this webinar, I'm pleased to introduce Mike Hogan. He has more than 10 years of experience with labor market and workforce dynamics, regional economic analysis, and survey research. His focus areas include implied labor market research for institutions of higher ed, federal agencies, employers, and state and local governments. So before we get started with this webinar, we'd like all of you, if you feel comfortable, to come off mute and just say your name, your coalition, and what your role is. Additionally, if you feel comfortable, please put why you joined the webinar today in the chat. So Christy, I'll start with you if you don't mind.
Sure, I'd love to do that. So I am with the Recompete effort in Clallam and Jefferson County in Washington State. And I am the person that is the administrator of the grant and the data analysis. And so this is a big thing for me because I don't, the data is hard to get, and I don't know if it's all reliable. So I'm really curious about how all of this is. Is that what I needed to share?
Yes, that's great.
Okay.
All right. Andrew Taylor, I'll pass it to you.
Hi, Andrew Taylor, Economic Development Officer at Decatur, Macon County. I head up their research division as well as their RFI response. I have a background in inferential statistics and analysis.
Great, thank you. All right, and Mitchell?
Hey everyone, Mitchell Baxter, grant coordinator with the Reconnecting Canton Recompete project. I helped a lot in the initial grant application, and we just towards the end of last year, completed our planning grant phase. So we're kind of outside of that. So just doing some post award help and things like that. But interested in the as part of our planning grant, we did some survey work collecting some workforce data. So interested to see what other folks are doing.
Great. Thank you. All right. We have two Andrews on the line, so I'll pass it to the next Andrew there.
Sure. I'm Andrew Haug. I'm the Director of Fund Development with Northwest Side Community Development Corporation in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And we're the lead organization for the Grow Milwaukee Recompete Coalition. And yeah, both through the Recompete Grow Milwaukee initiative and just in my regular day job, we do a lot of engagement with businesses that we're assisting to grow, and getting getting hard data on jobs, wages, characteristics of both employees and job quality metrics. It's a perennial challenge. So just excited to hear some new perspectives. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. And Larry, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, hi. Good afternoon, everybody. Larry Dixon with the Springfield Holyoke Recompete Coalition. And I'm having lunch, so that's why my camera is off. So look forward to hearing today. Thanks.
Thanks, Larry. All right. And so during this webinar, Mike will pause for questions throughout, but feel free to put any in the chat at any time and we can answer those during the pauses. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Mike.
Thank you, Avery. And just to confirm, you can hear me okay, and I'm not on mute. Well, thank you all. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Michael Hogan. I'm a colleague, work very closely with Jess and Avery. I have over 10 years of experience working here at RTI, doing a multitude of different approaches to collecting labor market data and engaging with employers. And I think that initially when this question came to me, I thought, all right, we want to talk about labor market data, but I'm being reminded that labor market data is only as useful as it can get you better engagement with employers, and reminded of the importance of working with employers and getting those insights. So we're going to talk today about kind of a little bit of a primer on labor market data, what things look like, but also some of the challenges with it, and then move into discussing a little bit more about employer engagement, survey design, and some of the lessons that I've learned from doing employer surveys at various scales and regions over the last 10 years, to kind of share with y'all some of the experiences I've had. But I also really want this to be a conversation. There are going to be a couple of breaks in here where I've got a couple of questions for you, and just based on the introductions, really excited to learn about the kinds of experiences that you've had with employer engagement and survey data collection. So we're going to cover a little bit of just background on labor market info, sources, and surveys, but mainly to ask why. Why are we doing surveys if all this data exists already? And I think that some of y'all have started to hint at that in your introductions. Talk a little bit about how we look at industry engagement and industry engagement surveys, some of those considerations. Talk about a sample process of what we have done in the past. Provide some sample questions and examples, and then go through a few lessons learned and recommendations from us. Over the course, there's going to, of the time, kind of the 30 to 40 minutes or so, this will be broken up and we'll have a couple of prompting questions for y'all to kind of discuss and to learn a little bit more about the experiences that you've had and why you've conducted employer surveys, what you value, and what lessons you've learned. Because kind of like you, we have a lot of experience doing this, and we are always constantly learning and trying to find new ways to engage and improve. So I'll go ahead and get started and give a bit of a background on kind of just stepping back. What is the point of thinking about labor market data? You hear about people talk about LMI, people talk about, the data, we got to have the hard data. And stepping back, kind of starting to think about just at a baseline, understanding baseline and trends around the region that you represent, knowing where you want to prioritize resources, there's more and more of a drive around federal compliance to have labor market data to back up some of these programs. So things like accessing Perkins funding for education now requires a labor market data component. EDA requires SEDS that have labor market data. And so there is an element of compliance with it. And then communicating with educators, employers, policymakers, individuals, et cetera. But I think, as y'all know very well, labor market info can get really confusing and really messy really quickly. One of the things that we found, and something that drives around that, is even understanding what labor market data is and where to find it is not always exactly a straightforward exercise. This is just some of the examples of the tools that are available right now around regional labor market data. There are some cool public data tools, things like Data Census, LEHD on the Map, that are free to access. They have that easy point and click interface and can be fast turnaround. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like here in our first column. But these can tend to be off the shelf. They tend to be limited kind of customization, and they can tend to lack granularity or specificity. In our second column, we can get into the raw data. So the number of federal and non-federal raw data sources that are available can be pretty overwhelming. And there's a lot of upside of looking at raw data from the BLS, from the census, IPUMS, ONET, IPEDS, NSF, from FRED, from state workforce agencies. They allow for a really high level of customization, granularity. These are often the backbone of other labor market tools. But the cons and the downsides to these is these are really complex to access. They require fairly advanced data skills, and the data is not always available at really high levels of granularity. But these data are publicly available, and you can download big raw data files and have an expert analyst look at them. In that third column, we get into some of these paid non-public data tools. So you hear about Lightcast, Esri, Implan, LinkedIn, which are some cool tools. You get a cool interface. You don't need necessarily advanced analytics skills. You can get some pretty good quality reports, but these can often be prohibitively expensive. And the customization and granularity of these sorts of tools can be really limited. And so I get into this fourth column, which is, I think, where we're going to focus our time today, are these custom surveys, business roundtables, interviews, and focus groups that can often provide really good, granular, specific local insights. These can be a tool for industry engagement, help you get buy-in. They can be real time, they can be forward-looking, but they require a lot of work. They require a high level of effort, and sometimes they can be biased by those who don't participate versus those who do. And then the last thing, which I put at the bottom, is that every day we're hearing more and more about ChatGPT, large language models. And we've done a lot of work around the role of using AI chatbots or LLMs to pull data. And they can pull data from a variety of sources, but they're often going to look at web pages and news releases. From my experience, the results have been really mixed. And if that's a topic we want to cover, that's something we can talk about later. And we have a webinar series that we did back in the fall around the use of some of these AI tools. But the results are extremely mixed when you try to use an AI chatbot to get labor market data. So I think about kind of some of these tools, and one of the ones that can be a fun one to go to and explore is this LEHD on the Map. You just Google census on the map as all one word, and you'll find it. And you can do this very interesting profile analyses for a local area. So I chose Johnston County, North Carolina. These are our neighbors just outside of Raleigh. It's a very fast-growing county. It's a county that 20 years ago would have been considered rural and is now one of the fastest growing counties in the state. But you can just get a sense of where jobs are concentrated. You can see some of these dots on the map that show you those job concentrations within the county, where people are working. And then you see those columns on the right, and you can start to segment things out by earnings, worker age. There are some industry breakdowns that you can add. And it's just a really cool tool to work with. So as I mentioned in that first column, some of these initial tools that you can use, this is, I think, one of the more interesting, easily accessible. It's got a little bit of a learning curve, but a cool database that you can start to take a look at some granular labor market data at a local level. So we provide that as an option to kind of explore, but I don't want to spend too much time on it because I want to start to think about that labor market data is necessary, but it's not sufficient. They can provide really important baselines and insights into how to understand your regional economies. But I think, as you all know, deeper industry engagement is needed to get that regional buy-in, start to understand more nuanced needs. And so as we do that, it can be really valuable to start to come prepared with that baseline understanding, know how many jobs are in this region, what sectors are growing, what those educational requirements are. It can help you identify those gaps and some of those key questions that you want to answer. It can make sure that your time is productive when engaging with industry partners. So I do want to pause, and I want to take 5 minutes or so to open up the question to you all. And if somebody wants to start, what has your experience been working with some of these standard labor market tools? What's missing? And where do these feed into your design of things like surveys and your industry outreach strategies?
I start. I've used on the map many times. Their constraints are basically how the demographics are broken up. It's assessed on the census level of populations of most concern or most interest. So we were using it to determine migration patterns within our region, but the highest earners stops at $3,333. And we were interested in higher income earners, and the census seemed to be baffled by that. They're like, why would you care about higher earners? Because we need to attract higher earner people to the region. They're like, no, we only care about low income people. So it's only as useful as the people who maintain, collect, and disseminate the data, what they are envisioned it for. So it has that limitation.
Yeah. Has anyone else used On the Map? Andrew can come and give us a primer on how to use it. Christy, what's your experience been?
So I've looked at a lot of different tools, and so this has been a learning experience for me to find all these tools for data. I'm not a data person. I am now, but I wasn't before. So coming into it very green, but the challenges that I have seen is how recent the data is or not. And so I'm like, the grant's going to be over before we even know if any of our stuff worked. And so, and the other thing is, my understanding is all the research and stuff when applying for the grant, with the strategy development money and stuff is we went through Western Washington University to get information about all the labor stuff in there because there was a lot of information on these regional data tools that they don't include everything or the enough detail, and it was astronomically expensive to have them do that. So we can't do that every year. We're not going to do that every year. So trying to get the relevant recent data is almost impossible.
Yeah, it really is a persistent challenge. And as I went back and was going through some of these labor tools, we have a whole data science department that does all of this custom coding and analysis and things. And a lot of these, you need to be a data science expert just to be able to work with a lot of the data tools. And then when you do, that data has a 2-year lag between when it's collected and when it's released. So there are a lot of valuable things, and it is that essential kind of piece of applying for grants, reporting for grants, the applications, but it also presents some challenges. We have time for maybe one more person wants to share what their experience has been working with some of the labor market tools. And if not, we can continue.
I can share. Mitchell here. Similar thoughts to what Christy shared. I think the only tool that we had used in the past was Lightcast, and I think that's the only one that I had heard of that you were mentioning. I just looked up on the map, and it looks. I'm going to do some research on that one because that one looks interesting as well. But very similar to what Christy said, just out of date market data, and expensive. We only really update what we get from Lightcast, potentially only every couple years, just because there's such a high cost to get some of that data. So
Yeah.
Can I make a
Yeah,
comment about Lightcast? So we do get some
Christy?
information from there, but we partner with our local uh, work source group through Washington State, and they have Lightcast. And so we partner with them. So they compile the report. We decided what we wanted, so we don't have to pay for it.
That's good.
So anyways, that's a possibility,
Yeah.
is to partner with somebody that already is doing it. Anyways.
It is a very expensive tool. One observation we've seen is that a lot of workforce development providers, whether those are at the four-year college or at the community and technical college level, are getting Lightcast because more and more of the federal compliance now is around alignment with labor markets. And so that's a tool that a lot of them have been subscribing to, and there's been greater demand to meet Perkins requirements and meet other Department of Education requirements.
Mhm. Well, and I was going to say one other thing. If you're doing it with back data, it's always difficult. The census is always a year behind. But now that with you mentioned AI, you don't need to be like an expert in SPSS or anything like that to do your own projections. If you just take your data and put it into like Chat GPT or something like that, and just say, project this out 2 years for me, it'll do that for you. So you don't. It's a useful tool. It's not going to think abstractly, but if you just say, "Here's my data set, project it to today," and it'll give you a projection.
Yeah. No, the large language model, the LLM capabilities just keep kind of blowing my mind with some of these things. I want to use this as an opportunity to start to kind of move into a little bit of our perspectives and our experience around industry surveys. And as Avery and Jess mentioned early on, we're talking today about surveying companies primarily and surveying employers. Surveying individuals comes with a couple of additional challenges around data privacy and PII, and so Engine is going to talk about that in an upcoming webinar. And I think it's just something to keep in mind that what we're talking about is we're talking about surveying industry leaders to understand and private sector employers to understand some of their needs and some of their needs around workforce and workforce development. So why do an industry survey? You have a specific question that's not readily accessible in existing data. So how are employers in our region connecting to the local community college and workforce system? You want to look forward. So Andrew, how do you think AI and automation will impact your business? Might be kind of wild to just ask AI that question. It'll say AI is the greatest thing ever. Or you're in a unique region or subsector that does not exist in standard data sources. So you might be interested in a specific neighborhood, a subpopulation, a tribe, a workforce subsector, et cetera. This can happen a lot in a place like if you're a smaller metro, or if you're a smaller county or a smaller town adjacent to a big metro area, oftentimes that data can tend to get blurred because it'll look at the data for the whole metro area, not for just the one census tract or county that you're looking at. So some considerations as you start to think about building out an industry survey, and some of the things that we think about as we're building one out, is first around existing networks. And this is something I'm going to kind of return to as we talk about it, is are there existing networks that we can be leveraging that can serve as that starting place for outreach? So these can be chambers of commerce, workforce boards, or industry groups that can just help get this off the ground. What are the key themes you want to focus on? And oftentimes it really helps to have a single pain point or a single focus area that'll get businesses to be involved. Workforce is a very common one. And I'm going to show a survey that we did last year that as soon as you get industry leaders talking about workforce, that's all they want to talk about. They're going to talk about it ad nauseum. Thinking about some regional champions, who's a trusted leader, leaders, or organizations in the region that can help to convene? Who can motivate people to participate? And then also just starting to think about some trade-offs about results. What are the resources? So personnel, technology, contact lists, incentives, et cetera, that you can bring to the table. Because a survey and kind of an industry outreach process can really be scaled based on how quickly it needs to be done, how many resources that you have, what's the sample that you're trying to get. And I think that we want to come in and share a little bit of our experience doing things that I would consider to be fairly local, fairly quick turnaround, and fairly low level of effort. Kind of knowing that we're in a resource constrained environment where we want to be able to get results and get applicable results quickly. So just some trade-offs that we think about as we're working on things. A long survey can get more detailed questions, but too many questions can be tedious and can really lower your response rate. Similarly, you can get a really large sample, but that'll be more costly and more time consuming. There's this idea of doing a targeted campaign where you're in charge of those outreach lists, and it can allow for really good tracking and follow-up. But it also requires access to really detailed lists and really good industry information to be able to do that targeted outreach versus doing outreach more openly, more publicly. And then there are other mixed methods that you can use. So online surveys are the standard, but we still see people doing phone surveys and paper surveys, which tend to be a lot more costly and a lot fewer people respond to them. And adding kind of focus groups and industry panels to that list will add to the cost, but can also help you to get more detail. As we think about kind of a sample timeline, and I'm again just speaking from our experience and some of the surveys that we've done over kind of a, let's say, an 8-month period. We've generally found this approach to be successful, but starting with assembling a core steering committee and having a lead identified to conduct that survey. With that core steering committee, you're identifying who's your target audience, what are your goals, what are your outreach methods, identifying some incentives and some champions to help you lead that survey. Those can be people on that steering committee, prioritizing those survey questions, and drafting and testing a prototype just with that core steering committee. Within the next couple months, preview the survey with some of the key business leaders, regional champions. You build that outreach campaign and prioritize what channels you want to share this survey through, and then launch it. And I think that kind of time period can be accelerated. It can be longer depending on your level of how connected you already are within the community and that steering committee. We usually try to think about 2 months for launching that survey and collecting data. Providing regular reminders on a weekly basis to some of your regional leaders, your steering committee, and your general public. And then monitoring data and targeting outreach to some of those low response rate groups. So as you're looking at certain industries that you want to focus on and seeing on a weekly basis, hey, we're not getting a great response rate here, finding ways to potentially add another incentive or to work with another industry group or another regional group. And then closing out, allowing for a preview of findings, again, with this kind of core steering committee or core business group, doing a smaller presentation, offering 3 to 4 larger scale presentations that can be scaled depending on where you are, events or webinars, and then generating some kind of permanent materials. So those can be your key findings, key takeaways, reports that can serve for regional needs, things like if they are going to go apply for another grant or they're trying to use the data for something else, having something that's a little more permanent and can serve towards the future. But provide this just as a sample, particularly looking at an industry survey for kind of a small regional group that's trying to understand a core segment of their workforce. And we think about when we think about the survey, thinking about question design, and it looks like I forgot a word in the third column. I apologize. But kind of think about three ways of looking at it, providing some context questions, some quantitative questions, and then some qualitative questions. So context questions, try to keep these as simple as possible and use language that the community is familiar with. And this really just allows you to track responses, identify trends, and some differences between subsegments. These are things like industry type, business size, and location. Some of those quantitative questions help you to get at that present or future state. You can set some benchmarks or compare subgroups. So these are things like hiring projections, skills needs, financial impacts. And then qualitative questions aren't always open-ended questions. These can be both open-ended and closed questions to allow you to capture regional opinions or sentiment. And I'll show you a couple examples of that. But they can be things like rating scales or selections, and then open-ended questions that can require more analysis, but I've found can provide really valuable insights into how community members, business leaders are perceiving some of these challenges and offer a lot deeper nuance. So effective questions can really help to drive participation. This is a question that we ran last year for, and I'm going to be referring back to this survey a couple of times, for a group of engineering employers in Western North Carolina. So as y'all know, Western North Carolina was hit by Hurricane Helene in 2024, but has also been facing a series of economic challenges around, no surprise, housing affordability. And so getting this sort of question designed well and asking engineering employers, what are the biggest challenges that they face when designing to join in your company and stay at your company? We provide a lot of these different examples. And this is an example of one of those qualitative questions that we can use to create with closed answers. So again, then we can see how they're perceiving different challenges within the workplace. So when we show it to transportation leaders, they're like, oh, this is great. We're doing wonderful. But when we show it to city council, when we show it to folks in the housing space, they're going to say, yeah, we're not surprised by this at all. And so it does kind of open up and allow for us to, I think, drive participation. You get people starting to talking about affordable housing challenges in the economic development space. We found that that's really been helpful to drive the conversation for employers to start advocating for more affordable housing and more interventions in housing in the region. And then effective delivery and results sharing. Again, as you finish up the survey, it really can include a combination of things. And we've done, I think, with all of our projects, an all of the above approach. So a single large event or series of events, things like business roundtables or Chamber of Commerce events, webinars. You can have small snapshots, social media, sound bites, dashboards, formal static reports, and news releases. And so having this combination, and usually people are going to engage with the data in different ways. And if one of your goals is to be able to get kind of a broad understanding and public buy-in, both from the general public as well as from kind of the business or local policy community, it's really helpful to have several different ways of sharing the data and tailoring that based on the audience that you're trying to communicate with. So a city council that's going to allow you 3 minutes to talk about it is not going to be the same as a 1-hour webinar about the project. And so really knowing how to flex between those two spaces is one of the things that is challenging, but it's also part of really good, effective information sharing. I want to pause right now. I was kind of asking, like, I don't want to get questions right away, but I do want to allow some space for some questions in the middle. And so if there's anybody who's got a question that they'd like to share at the moment, and then we'll also have a few minutes to talk and kind of open up the discussion at the end.
I have a couple questions. So one of my coworkers asked me to ask this, and we hear that employers and different things they get surveyed out, you know. um, and anyways, and so the idea of incentivizing, to complete one of those, I haven't looked into it, but is that allowed to use incentive money from a grant?
Uh, Generally speaking, yes.
Okay.
We try to use survey incentives whenever possible. I would recommend bringing it up with your grant manager, but I do believe that
Okay.
in most cases, um, entering a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card is permissible.
Oh, like a
And
drawing thing. Okay, that's interesting. Okay.
um,
Um,
and I'll actually get to that in a few minutes because that survey fatigue thing, oof,
uh-huh.
businesses get burned out by taking a lot of surveys.
Yeah, so
It's real.
our local community college has put out a survey to our local employers, and they got some responses, but not very many, because we're trying to find out how can we help, what's the best things.
Mhm.
But anyways, I feel like we have a pretty good idea of what the issues are, kind of that the example you showed with housing and stuff, because that was all kind of done to even get the grant. So we feel like we know that. So it's more about for us moving forward to see the impact that we're having. Like,
Mhm.
okay, XYZ employer, how many people are you hiring because of our efforts? And because, like the outcomes and
Mhm.
figuring out how to get that information consistently is more kind of where we're at.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the next section.
Okay.
But that's very helpful context as we think about
Mm-hmm.
kind of how we can kind of best share our experience. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to chime in really quick to talk about employer fatigue too. And what your presentation brought up, Mike, was thinking about the Western North Carolina one. Who in a company do you want to be filling out the survey is another step that you need to think about. Is it the head of the company? Is it the HR person? Is it as many people in the company as possible? Because that can kind of help you tailor your outreach, but then also maybe avoid some fatigue if it isn't the same person who gets surveyed every time. And I think Andrew, maybe you had come off
Mm.
mute.
Oh, yeah, we've dealt with that as well when we're talking to these community service. We do sometimes BR&E visits, but when the population is so low, when you're talking about employers, if it's only like 300 employers, your sample only needs to be like 100. And so you can make it the inferences from that. But yeah, sometimes you have to just stick on them and make sure that you get the key decision makers. Not all employers are
Yeah.
created equal, so you got to make sure, like the checklist. That's why I generally add, in the demographics, identify who you are, just to make sure that the big opinion makers are in the sample.
Oh, yeah. And that is one of those context questions that can be real helpful. I'm going to spend about 10 minutes just going through a few examples and sharing a few more lessons learned that I think will get to one of Christy's questions. And then we can spend about the last 10 minutes with any additional discussion before we close out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our engineering workforce survey as an example. You'll notice that Jess and Avery both worked on this one as well. This was conducted between April and August of 2025. It was shared, and I think this is something that could be kind of helpful as we think about the ways that the survey gets shared can be very helpful when it comes to getting more responses. So we shared this through two different methods. One was through Chamber of Commerce and partner channels, so different industry organizations and Chamber of Commerce members and people who were trusted in this network of employers, that they were getting the survey from them and not from Michael Hogan researcher at RTI. They were getting it from a name that they recognized was somebody they respected and in the region. We also did targeted outreach through the email campaign, and we got 123 total responses. Again, to understand employer demand, trends, strengths, and challenges. So this is Christy getting at that forward-looking workforce survey in Western North Carolina. We collected some questions about that industry sector as one of those characteristics, but we also did a subsector analysis. So if people selected manufacturing, we had a kind of a select roundtable of manufacturers in the region that were really interested in some of the specifics. So we added an additional sub question around, of these 50 manufacturers, if you select manufacturing, you get another question, which is what type of manufacturing are you in? Western North Carolina has a very strong base of advanced aerospace and automotive parts companies. And so we were able to get some specific responses from that sector. We were able to get some quantitative data that was forward-looking, looking at the percentage of companies expecting to add new engineers, what that amounted to for new jobs in engineering, where that demand was coming from those manufacturers, and whether it was in region versus out of region workers. And it was an interesting question that has come up frequently from employers in the region pertaining to the housing challenge, but this perception that a lot of people are moving in from the region and companies are kind of importing high wage talent versus trying to hire people from the local population to pay high wage jobs. So getting at that question was something that was really identified as a priority from our steering committee and from our working group, and one that we tried to address head on through that survey question. And so I'm just sharing a little sample of some of the outputs and some of the things that we shared with a few different workforce roundtables in the region. We found that Western Carolina University, I don't know if we have any catamounts in the room, but of those companies surveyed, 57% were looking to work with Western Carolina, which is again a regional college here in North Carolina that serves, that has a very successful applied engineering program. And so looking at the different regional partners that they're looking to hire and recruit and hire engineering employees from, it really helped them to reinforce that while the anecdotes showed that companies were trying to import their talent, the data showed that companies were trying to hire their talent locally. So it was a good data point for us to capture something that wasn't easily available in some of the public data and dispel a little bit of the kind of myth of employers just trying to bring in people from outside. We got some really good open-ended questions. So we took the time to allow employers to fill in open-ended question. And I think as we talked to a lot of the regional education partners, some themes emerge. So these are speaking to some of the regional education partnerships. So with the Community Technical College, Western Carolina, the UNC System Schools, and the community colleges, just giving more detail into how the employers within the kind of manufacturing and engineering space were engaging. And then we asked specifically about automation and AI, because this is a topic that everyone was concerned about, everyone continues to be concerned about. And so we were able to look at sort of the contrast and do a little bit more myth busting around the advancements in AI, robotics, automation, et cetera. How are they affecting the workforce? And specifically around the engineering workforce. And companies were very quick to say adopting technologies, investing in training, increasing demand. And very few companies said we are hiring fewer entry levels or we are going to reduce our workforce. So this, I think, was very reassuring to some of the education providers in the room. And I think a lot of the employers said, we're still going to need engineers. They're just going to know how to use these technologies. So just a few examples of questions that I think we were able to ask and really successfully get data around, because they got at things that were not necessarily readily available in the publicly available data. So I think just a few lessons learned and a few recommendations. Christy, survey fatigue is real. Business people are very busy. So I think that there's an important component of just keep in mind that there's other surveys out there, other businesses that are being asked to do stuff, and build a schedule that meets their needs. Warm, trusted relationships and community leaders matter. So warm introductions, series of introductions, having those survey links coming from somebody who's trusted and known can really help, can be very important as part of an outreach strategy. Different audiences are going to want different things. So as you're designing a survey, doing that outreach, just keeping in mind, you're going to have to balance different priorities and asks. And then finally, find ways to add value beyond what is just in your basic LMI. So it's important not to repeat what people already know. When it comes to kind of survey fatigue and event fatigue, I think businesses don't want to be put in a room where they're just going to learn something they've already learned or have to be asked about data that's already available, but really find ways for this outreach and engagement to go beyond just what's in that basic labor market data. So kind of some simple searches to get you started and ground your efforts can really help to make sure that you're not duplicating efforts. So I'm going to close. My name and email are on the slide here, and open it up to any final kind of Q&A and discussion.